Lord Christopher Monckton was one of the top advisors and in the cabinet of Margaret Thatcher. He's a best-selling author and researcher, a top inventor, and is no stranger to this audience. He'll just be with us till the bottom of the hour, maybe a little bit more if he has time. But I wanted to get his take specifically on what's happening in Greece, because from my perspective, whether Greece gets bailed out or not, the EU is designed to create financial crisis to consolidate nation states. Just 2 years ago, the EU announced a move to get the nation states like France and Spain and others to not even call their national teams the French or the Spanish, but to give them now basically dinosaur and superhero names and mythical names, because even the idea of having national teams is xenophobic and bad. See, political correctness is to kill any national independent ideology. And when you research deeper, most of Greece's so-called debt is globalist bank-run derivatives that have been signed on to. And separately, we have the announcements they're going to bail in and take money out of people's bank accounts. China has started doing that. That happened, of course, a few years ago there in the Mediterranean as well, in Cyprus. And now banks are making similar announcements and preparations here. And they're acting like cash is illegal. So this is a very dangerous situation we're in. Some say it could bring down the whole world economy. I wanted to get the perspective of a man who's been, again, at the highest levels of government, been an editor of a major newspaper, studied the financial situation in Greece, is one of the main opponents of the European dictatorship. Lord Monckton, thank you for joining us.
Well, Alex, it's a pleasure to be with you. And in a way, I could say I told you so, because in 1996, I gave a lecture to the faculties of economics and of international relations at the University of St Andrews here in Scotland. And what I said was, look, the euro is going to fail. Now, it didn't even start for 3 years after that, but already I knew it was going to fail because they didn't understand the elementary economics of trying to put together an area with a single currency. You have to have nations who are all more or less kind of economically competent at the same level. This is known as the economics of optimal currency areas. Now, these words are simply not known by the average politician. And as a result, they sailed ahead with the euro when it couldn't possibly work. Now it's failed. But here's the warning. If this one has failed, imagine how much bigger the failure will be when the UN gets its way in Paris this December and sets up a world government, which is like the EU, but on a global scale, with no escape for anyone. At least at the moment, if you don't like the EU, you can get out and go to the States or go to somewhere, Canada, Australia. You don't have to be in the EU. But if there's a global government, there's no escape unless you've got a spaceship. And the problem is that these politically correct people you were talking of, the people who think there is only one view, and that's the Marxist view, and nothing else should be allowed to prevail. These people are dangerous. It was they who captured the European Union. They didn't actually set it up, but they captured it very quickly after it was set up. As you know, the KGB was largely instrumental in founding the euro-dollar market and had a lot of influence on shaping the creation of the euro, because they knew that the euro would undermine the economies of the EU, which it's now doing, even though Britain is outside the EU. We are threatened by the bankruptcy of Greece, because this could bring down a house of cards with Portugal, Spain, Ireland, even France, Italy, Belgium, all these countries, Poland. They're all running massive debts. They're all in serious financial trouble.
Lord Monckton,
financial trouble that's made worse by the euro.
You call it the EU dictatorship. You just don't use that word lightly. That's not rhetoric. Explain to them why you call it a dictatorship and what percentage of UK laws are now by imperial edict from the shadow bureaucracy.
That's right. now 5 laws out of every 6 that are made in the United Kingdom and inflicted upon us are made because the unelected commissars of the European Union, who have the sole right to propose legislation for the whole of Europe, and that legislation takes precedence over all our own domestic legislation, they have to do what the commissars tell us to do. Commissar is the official German name for the 30 people who, behind closed doors, run Europe. They have absolute power, enormous wealth, and no responsibility. These are the people who now dictate to us what our laws shall be. Democracy has gone from within the European Union. It will go from the world as a whole if the EU and the UN get together at Paris, as they're already planning to do, to set up a world government in the name of saving the planet from
I want to talk
climate.
about that world government because they tried 5-6 years ago. You were there, got the secret document. Of course, you got no credit. It was just devastating victory. It was like winning a major war, stopping that global government treaty that they tried to keep secret. They're keeping TPP secret. But now more and more, the Pope's calling for global governance on climate change. It seems the whole system and their operatives are coming out being honest, at least on the surface, that yes, it's global government, but they're selling it as something to save people. But you talk about how they use the Soviet or communist German name Kommissar for their political officers. The Commissars, of course, were the political police in the Soviet Union under Obama. This is mainstream news. The Pentagon in 2010 said they're, quote, preparing to arrest libertarians and conservatives. This is actually in the Army document, and put them in, quote, re-education camps. It actually says re-education camps. So fantastical, so over the top.
This is the danger, because not only have you got the entire governing class now ganging up on the people in individual nations. I mean, look at your Supreme Court. It got 1 out of its 3 big decisions right, and look how badly wrong the other 2 were. You have the Supreme Court, unelected by anyone, effectively making new law contrary to the Constitution.
Unprecedented.
Contrary to its obligations. And why are they all doing this? Why is the Pentagon joining in and saying, right, we're going to lock up the likes of Monckton and Jones in re-education camps? Why are they doing this?
Well, that was my point. I'm not joking. I feel like a liar when I say that because it sounds so outrageous, but I can show people the mainstream article in the Army document. Why would they use terms like commissar and re-education? I mean, they're using actual totalitarian terminology. They're not even hiding it. Why?
Because they think they've got away with it, and they may have got away with it. The problem is that at Paris in December, which is the really big climate conference, this is the big push where the entire kind of communist group worldwide is getting together and has captured most governments. Now, in fact, very nearly all governments, I think, are going to sign this agreement. Now, the one thing that needs to be in that agreement to stop it setting up a world government is a clause the same as the clause that's in the Kyoto Protocol, which preceded this one. And the Kyoto Protocol of 1997, which America didn't sign under Al Gore as president of the Senate, because 95 out of 100 senators voted it down. But even that protocol at least contained what's called a freedom clause. It's a cessation clause, technically, is the name for it. It means that any country after 6 months or a year who doesn't like the obligations under the Kyoto Protocol can simply give notice and break free. Canada's done it, Russia's done it, Japan's done it. Several others, I think, will do it when they get the chance. But what is now being proposed is a treaty like the European treaties, which have no escape clauses. Once you're in, you are subject to the alien power, whether you like it or not, whether your voters like it or not, whether your Congress likes it or not. That's why this really is the end of democracy. It's the end of democracy, not just in some sort of general hand-waving, eye-rolling sense. It's the end of democracy because the law in future will make sure that the supreme law that applies to the United States after Paris will be the law made by what at the moment, the treaty draft, because I have seen it, is calling a governing body. Now, 6 years ago at Copenhagen, which you mentioned earlier, they called it a government. They're now calling it a governing body, but it's going to have even bigger powers of government than the government they were going to establish in Copenhagen. And much of it is already in place. They've just quietly steamed ahead, regardless of the defeat at Copenhagen, and put 1,000 new international bureaucracies in place, all interlocking with one another. The Pentagon talks to them, of course, the EU is in there. And there's now 1,000 of these bureaucracies, which together will form the sinews, the enforcement arm, if you like, of this new hideous totalitarian global government. And all of this, of course, based on the climate lie, just as the European Union was based on the lie that the Soviet Union would otherwise pull Europe apart. In fact, NATO was already guaranteeing the security of Europe. We didn't need the European Union for that. And indeed, if anything, it has increased the risk of tension and war in Europe rather than reducing it.
Absolutely. And you were right telling Thatcher that 30 years ago. It's certainly been proven true. Moving forward, as we're about to go to break, sir, and again, Lord Christopher Monckton joins us. So undoubtedly, do you agree with the point I've made and others are saying that this is the moment that they uncloak, admit world government, still deceive on the details, but basically emerge? I mean, it looks like this is the big assault. This is the next big phase, the big takeover. This is the big assault.
This is the moment when they think they're going to get away with setting up a world government. And after the break, I'll tell you how we're going to stop them.
It's an epic time to be alive, folks, because we're not just being conquered by some, advanced civilization or something. We're being conquered by tyranny. But Lord Monckton was just joining us, probably the chief EU critic in the world, helped beef up and promote UKIP, that's now one of the fastest growing parties in the world. Nigel Farage is saying he believes that we're seeing the beginning of the breakup of the EU. We'll get Lord Monckton's take on that. But global government, from the TPP to the Atlantic Treaty, all of it's being welded together now. And the taxing authority for it, the carbon tax, is being pushed. That's why they'll never give it up, no matter how discredited it is. So, Lord Monckton, you were saying before the break, we can stop it. You going to the alternative press, literally parachuting in Durban, South Africa when they wouldn't let you in, that stunt getting attention. You more than anybody. I know you don't want credit, but it's credit to humanity, credit to the individual taking action. Undoubtedly, if you didn't get the secret text of Copenhagen, undoubtedly if you didn't pull stunts to expose it, undoubtedly if the cops didn't beat you up and bring attention to what was happening, a lot of this stuff would have gotten through. So when you say we can stop the formation of open world government, I'm listening. What do we do?
Right. The first thing is we're going to have to set up our own parallel freedom institutions worldwide. And the most important of these is a currency. If we take away their power to issue currency because we do it better than they do, then we'll stop them. When I gave that lecture in 1996 in St Andrews University, I said the euro is just another Me Too fiat currency, no assets in the bank to prop it up. In fact, now it has negative assets in the bank propping it up. But if we were to set up our own currency, people would rush to use it. You can now make a currency of your own. It's no longer illegal. They can't stop you. As long as you don't print it or mint it, you just have it as an electronic instrument of saving against which you can switch your credit card, so you can spend on it just as if you were spending in dollars. Then we can stop inflation in its tracks. We can take currency away from central banks and put it back in the hands of the people and make a fortune doing it, Alex. That you and I could do this very well. I've been studying this for some years. I'm now just about ready to start. That is step one, which is that there's got to be our own independent currency.
I totally agree, and more transparent than Bitcoin. I'm not attacking Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, no, Bitcoin I would attack because it is simply, there's no assets at the back of that. That's why 78% of the value of Bitcoins was wiped out just last year alone. And the person who set it up committed suicide. It is a nightmare because they didn't do it right. What it shows is there's a huge demand for anything that isn't a government.
And imagine one based on universal liberty and freedom, promoting libertarian enlightenment ideas. Everyone would politically support it. And if it was backed by something real, explain this to me, it would be a sensation.
Certainly. You come to me with your Mickey Mouse dollars or euros or pounds, and I give you, let's call it the talent in return. And that would be simply an electronic unit of currency, just like a unit in a unit fund. And there would be fund managers who manage the fund that represents the talents I've given you. So you give me your dollars. I don't want to hold dollars because they're going to inflate away. So what I do is I spend those dollars quick the day you give them to me, buying assets that go into the fund so that the entire currency is completely self-funding. And it's enormously profitable.
That'd be the first currency to ever do that in history that wasn't fiat or based in gold.
Give you an example. There was the Mark Banco in Hamburg, which operated for 250 years until about 1800. And that was so stable because it was based on silver. It was always about 103%.
This is so exciting. Stay there. Let's talk about it, Lord Monckton, when we come back. Long segment coming up. We'll also give you his website when we return. I'm Alex Jones, Infowars.com. About a year and a half ago, Anthony Gucciardi just said, man, I just did a Dr. Gribb's liver cleanse, the one he recommends, and he's developing this proprietary stuff he's testing on himself right now. You really ought to do it. The results are dramatic after 6 days. And I'm like, no way I'm doing it. I don't believe that there's giant black or green balls in my gallbladder. And this is how ignorant I am. And he's like, look at it online. I'm not looking at it online because stuff like that grosses me out. I don't want to go there. Well, finally, about 6 months ago, they convinced me to do it.
I personally think everybody should go through liver cleansing if you haven't done one. Results speak for themselves. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people have done this, and it dates back even 1,000 years, drinking oils to cleanse and purge the liver. Actually, the Greeks and over in India with Ayurvedic medicine have done it the same way. But how it works is what you should do, and this is what our proprietary research led us to do back starting in the early 90s when we were looking at the best ways to cleanse the liver, was to develop an herbal formula that contains herbs that will help soften or break down these globules or these stones in the liver and the gallbladder.
This Liver Shield is the high-quality proprietary liver Trex developed by Dr. Gribb that we've private labeled through him, and it's extremely strong, extremely concentrated, extremely high-powered. You combine that with the Oxy Powder, oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, dietary supplement, clinically tested. We have them discounted at the lowest price you're going to find anywhere. Infowarslife.com. Obviously, folks should probably talk to their healthcare provider before they do this. This is one of the single biggest results, if not the biggest, I've ever seen in my life, literally in a 6-day period. This is something anybody can do. Obviously, the literature is well known on what liver cleanses do. This is the best one out there from our research. Infowarslife.com or 888-253-3139. Are making similar announcements and preparations here, and they're acting like cash is illegal. So this is a very dangerous situation we're in. Some say it could bring down the whole world economy. I wanted to get the perspective of a man who's been, again, at the highest levels of government, been an editor of a major newspaper, studied the financial situation in Greece, is one of the main opponents of the European dictatorship. Lord Monckton, thank you for joining us.
Well, Alex, it's a pleasure to be with you. And in a way,
having national teams is xenophobic and bad. See, political correctness is to kill any national independent ideology. And when you research deeper, most of Greece's so-called debt is globalist bank-run derivatives that have been signed onto. And separately, we have the announcements they're going to bail in and take money out of people's bank accounts. China has started doing that. That happened, of course, a few years ago there in the Mediterranean as well, in Cyprus. And now banks...
I could say I told you so because in 1996, I gave a lecture to the faculties of economics and of international relations at the University of St Andrews here in Scotland. And what I said was, look, the euro is going to fail. Now, it didn't even start for 3 years after that, but already I knew it was going to fail because they didn't understand the elementary economics of trying to put together an area with a single currency. You have to have nations who are all more or less kind of economically competent at the same level. This is
what's happening in Greece, because from my perspective, whether Greece gets bailed out or not, the EU is designed to create financial crisis to consolidate nation states. Just 2 years ago, the EU announced a move to get the nation states like France and Spain and others to not even call their national teams the French or the Spanish, but to give them now basically dinosaur and superhero names and mythical names, because even the idea of Lord Christopher Monckton was one of the top advisors and in the cabinet of Margaret Thatcher. He's a best-selling author and researcher, a top inventor, and is no stranger to this audience. He'll just be with us till the bottom of the hour, maybe a little bit more if he has time. But I wanted to get his take specifically